I want to start with a question that it honestly bothered me when I first read it in the notes. It feels a little accusatory. What if the reason we aren't making a difference in our leadership, our communities, our families, has nothing to do with our skills? What if it's just not a lack of strategy? What if the problem is just, well, geometry,
Geometry.
distance,
Yeah.
specifically the distance we keep between ourselves and the people we claim to serve or lead?
It is a confronting idea. It forces you to look at your leadership through a really spatial lens. Where are you standing relative to the problem?
We are diving into a text today titled Go, The Theology and Cost of Crossing Boundaries. And I have to be honest, when I saw the title Go, I sort of groaned. I was ready for a travelogue. I thought this was going to be about passports, packing lists, maybe a guilt trip about not moving to a jungle somewhere.
That is the standard association, right? We hear go and we think
Exactly.
geography, we think about movement from point A to point B on a map.
Usually involving a plane ticket.
And a sense of adventure, yeah. But this source material isn't about travel at all. It takes that idea and just completely flips it.
It frames going not as a travel guide, but as a fairly ruthless analysis of presence versus performance.
That distinction is the core thesis. The source argues that for modern professionals, and really anyone trying to lead in the 21st century, we have been trained to lead from a safe distance. We manage systems, we analyze data, we send emails.
It's clean, it's controlled.
Right. But this text redefines going not as distance traveled, but as proximity chosen.
Proximity chosen. That implies intent.
Exactly. It's about moving from leading from a distance, which, protects us, to leading through descent, which exposes us.
That sounds dangerous. I mean, descent implies going down, losing altitude.
It is dangerous because it requires embodied presence. It's about being there physically, emotionally, and relationally.
Well, let's get into the mechanics of this because the source breaks this down pretty clearly. We need to talk about the Incarnational Model, which is a fancy way of saying why actually being there beats being efficient. Then we have to talk about the cost, because the text is brutally honest about what happens when you close that gap. And finally, the myth of quick fruit, which is going to be painful for anyone who lives by their quarterly OKRs.
And we'll finish with the practical toolkit, because the text actually offers a way to map your own proximity and fight what it calls the violence of hurry.
Let's start with that first pillar, the incarnational shift. The source makes this point that professionals are trained to optimize control. But why is distance such a villain here? I mean, boundaries are healthy, right? I don't need to be best friends with everyone I manage.
Of course, boundaries are necessary. But the text argues that we often confuse boundaries with defense mechanisms. Distance protects power. Think about it. If I'm leading from a distance, I control the narrative. I can optimize the outcome without getting messy.
If I'm just sending a memo, I don't have to deal with the fallout in real time.
It's the difference between a drone strike and infantry. One is safe for the operator, the other isn't.
That's a stark way to put it, but yeah. The source contrasts this safe distance with the ultimate model of leadership in the Christian tradition, the gospel itself. There's a line in there that I love. The gospel didn't arrive as a memo from heaven.
Which is funny to imagine God just hitting reply all to humanity.
Hey guys, quick update. Stop sinning. Best, God.
It would have been efficient, much cheaper. But the source emphasizes that the gospel arrived as a body that eats and walks and suffers and stays. This leads us to a key Greek technical term the text relies on. It's escutcheons.
Escutcheon. Okay, and that's from the Gospel of John, right?
John 1.14. We usually translate it as dwelt among us, but literally it means to pitch a tent. The significance is that God didn't just visit humanity on a tourist visa. He didn't stay in a hotel. He moved in. He pitched a tent right in the middle of the neighborhood.
With all the noise and smell and lack of privacy that implies?
Exactly. This is the Incarnational Model. And the source makes it clear this model is inefficient.
It's incredibly slow.
Yeah.
And frankly, tents are uncomfortable.
They are. And you can't scale pitching a tent. You can't automate it.
The text uses a phrase to describe this that felt very visceral. Obedience with skin on. What are they getting at there?
It's pushing back against the cognitive drift of modern faith and modern activism, for that matter. We tend to think that if we agree with an idea, we've done the work. I believe in justice, or I believe in community. I can retweet a cause and feel like a moral person.
Right. I've raised awareness. I've done my job.
Exactly. But obedience with skin on means listening before you speak. It means being with someone before you try to change them. It shifts the metric from agreement to movement. If you agree with caring for the poor, but you don't actually know the names of anyone in poverty, have you really obeyed?
Oof, that hits home. There's a theological concept brought up here, kenosis, that seems to underpin all this. It's usually translated as self-emptying.
Yes, and this is crucial for the leadership angle. In most organizations, you climb the ladder to gain privilege. You get the corner office. You get an assistant so you don't have to schedule your own meetings. Kenosis is the inversion of that. Real authority, according to this text, doesn't come from hoarding privilege. It comes from giving it up.
The example used is Jesus washing feet, which, we hear that story so often, it loses its shock value. We see it as this nice ceremonial gesture.
But in that cultural context, for the leader to do the hygiene work for his subordinates was unthinkable. It was social suicide. It was a humiliating task reserved for the lowest servant.
But that's power expressed as service, moving from the head of the table to the floor.
And the source argues that we have lost this because we avoid inconvenience. We celebrate the idea of mission, but we construct our lives to avoid the inconvenience of actual proximity.
That brings us to the second area we need to cover, the cost. Because if you get close to people, I mean really close, not just networking, close things get complicated fast. And frankly, it sounds exhausting.
The source is refreshing here because it doesn't romanticize it. It doesn't pretend this is going to be some Hallmark movie where everyone hugs at the end. It talks explicitly about scars and loss and rejection.
It mentions that if you get close enough to people to actually help them, you are close enough to get hit.
Literally and metaphorically, it details specific costs, vulnerability, misunderstanding, and the loss of control. When you keep people at arm's length, you can maintain a curated image. You can be the expert. When you are up close pitching your tent next to theirs, they see your flaws.
They see you before you've had your coffee. They see your impatience.
All of it. The text profiles the Apostle Paul here, but not the version I'm used to hearing about. Usually Paul is the superhero planting churches, writing the New Testament.
Winning everywhere he goes.
But the source pulls the camera back. It focuses on the shipwrecks, the prisons, the riots, the friends who abandon him. It presents him as a man marked by trauma. And the argument is that his weakness was his witness.
That's a counterintuitive phrase. Weakness was his witness. In my industry, weakness is a liability. You hide the weakness.
In most industries it is. You scrub your resume of failures. But the text argues that scars create a credibility that accolades cannot. In a world of curated success Instagram filters, LinkedIn humble brags people inherently distrust perfection. They trust the person who has bled a little, who has stayed when it was hard.
But there is a massive trap here. The source spends a good amount of time warning about power dynamics. Because if I decide to go to a marginalized community, whether that's across the ocean or across the tracks in my own city, I'm bringing my privilege with me. I can't just pretend I don't have it.
This is the danger of the missionary temptation or, saviorism.
The I'm here to rescue you vibe.
Exactly. The source is very stern about this. Good intentions are not enough. If you have wealth, education, or status, you enter the room with a tilt. The gravity pulls toward you. If you aren't careful, you end up engaging in cultural erasure.
The text gave some historical examples of this going wrong.
It discusses colonial missions that conflated Christianity with European culture, basically saying to be Christian, you have to dress like us, speak like us, act like us. That isn't incarnation, that's colonization.
That's power over, not power with. You're asking the other person to do all the moving.
Right. But then it contrasts that with Hudson Taylor. And the details there were fascinating. I knew the name, but I didn't know the specifics of what he did.
Walk us through that.
Well, when he went to China in the 19th century, most missionaries lived in compounds and wore British suits. They maintained their Britishness as a sign of dignity. Taylor looked at that and said, this is a barrier. They look at me and see a foreigner, not a brother. So he adopted Chinese dress, he shaved the front of his head, and grew a queue pigtail.
Which, for a Victorian Englishman, was a huge degradation of status.
He was mocked by his peers. They called him unstable. They thought he had gone native. But he understood that the cost of crossing a boundary must fall on the one who goes, not the one being visited. He took the social hit so they didn't have to.
That distinction, that the cost falls on the goer, is powerful. But it takes so much time. Learning a language, adopting a culture, building trust, that takes years, which runs headfirst into the third pillar, the myth of quick fruit.
This is where the text critiques our modern obsession with metrics. We want results yesterday. We want viral success. We want the before and after photo without the 10 years in between.
I feel called out. Every quarterly review is, what have you done lately? If I told my stakeholders I'm pitching a tent and learning to listen, I'd be fired.
You would, but the source introduces the myth of quick fruit. It argues that efficiency is often an idol that deforms faithfulness. If you are obsessed with efficiency, you cannot be incarnational. People are inefficient. Relationships are inefficient.
Trauma is inefficient. You cannot optimize a friendship.
No. And there's a phrase the text uses that feels intense. The violence of hurry.
Violence of hurry.
Yes. It suggests that hurry isn't just a scheduling issue. It's a spiritual hazard. It creates an inability to love. The quote is, "Love, presence, and obedience cannot flourish under strain." If you are rushing a relationship, you aren't loving that person. You're processing them. You're trying to extract a transaction so you can move on.
And the source uses the biblical timeline to prove this isn't a new problem. The pacing is just ridiculous by modern standards.
It is. Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity learning a trade, being a neighbor, for just 3 years of public ministry.
That's a 10-to-1 prep-to-performance ratio. Terrible ROI.
Terrible. Or look at Abraham waiting decades for a son, or Israel spending 40 years in the wilderness just for formation. The takeaway is that long obedience in the same direction is the goal.
It also brings up the parable of the sower. I've heard this 1,000 times. Seeds falling on rocks, thorns, good soil. But the leadership application here was interesting.
The analysis focuses on control. The farmer cannot control the soil quality. He can't control the rain or the sun. His only job is to scatter faithful seeds. We are responsible for the sowing, not the growing.
Which is a massive release of pressure, theoretically. But practically, I still want to control the growing. I want to guarantee the outcome.
We all do. We want to manufacture the outcome because that validates our effort. If I sow and nothing grows, I feel like a failure. But the text says, the sowing was the success. The outcome is not in your hands.
So let's pivot to the practical, because I know listeners are thinking, okay, this is profound, but I'm an accountant in the suburbs. I'm not Hudson Taylor. What do I actually do on a Tuesday?
This is where the source gets really tactile. It introduces the concept of proximity mapping.
Okay, walk us through this toolkit. How do we do it?
Step 1 is simple. Draw the map. Visualize your daily circles. Where do you go? Home, work, the gym, the coffee shop. But there's a specific diagnostic question to ask. Who is near me physically but invisible to me relationally?
That's a haunting question. Who am I standing next to but not seeing?
Exactly. Step 2 is name the gaps. The source calls this the theology of absence. Who is missing from your map entirely? Is it the elderly, the migrant worker, the person with different politics?
The text had that specific example of an urban pastor, right?
Yes. She lived in a very diverse city, but when she did this mapping exercise, she realized she only knew middle-class professionals like herself. She was physically located in diversity, but relationally she was in a bubble. She had to name that gap before she could cross it.
So once you see the map and you see the gaps, what is step 3? Just go talk to them. That sounds awkward.
It is awkward, and the source admits that, but step 3 is intentional nearness. And the source warns, start small, don't try to save the world.
And what does small look like?
It calls it the small crossing. Crossing the street to a neighbor you've waved at for 5 years but never spoken to. Or the shared meal, eating with someone who doesn't look or think like you. The text shares the story of Fatima.
Right, Fatima. She wasn't a professional activist.
Far from it. She simply noticed her elderly neighbors were struggling to get their groceries up the stairs. She didn't launch a nonprofit. She just started carrying bags. Then she started checking in. That small act of nearness created a micro community where there was isolation. That is going. It didn't require a passport. It required noticing.
It seems so simple, but doing that consistently, that's the hard part. Willpower fades after about 2 weeks.
That's why the advice concludes with the need for a rule of life.
Which sounds like a medieval monastic thing.
It comes from that tradition. It's basically a structure to sustain your intentions because you can't rely on feelings. You need a rhythm. The source mentions practicing Sabbath not just as a nap, but as a resistance to that violence of hurry. You stop producing so you can remember you are human.
And in prayerful observation, literally asking God who is here when you walk into a room, instead of asking, what do I need to do here?
Right. And one that stood out to me, the practice of staying put.
Staying put.
When things get hard or boring or awkward, the instinct is to flee. to check your phone, to move to a new city. Staying put is a spiritual discipline of stability. You can't have proximity if you're always in motion. You can't be incarnational if you are always looking for the exit.
So if we zoom out, we've really journeyed from thinking about go as buying a plane ticket to go, as just stopping.
We moved from go as travel to go as presence. We replaced efficiency with patience. And we replaced power with vulnerability.
It's a complete rewiring of how we think about impact. It's not about how far you go, but how deep you go with the people right in front of you.
And realizing that the cost, the awkwardness, the time, the risk of rejection, that cost isn't a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's the sign that you're doing it right. If it doesn't cost you anything, you probably haven't crossed the boundary yet.
I want to leave the listener with the final provocation from the source material. It's a question that I've been chewing on all week, and honestly, I don't have a good answer for it yet. Who is the person physically closest to you right now that you know the least about?
That is the question. And if we connect this to the theological capstone of the text, remember the premise is that God is a God who goes first. He crossed the ultimate boundary to get to us. So the question isn't whether he will go. He already went. The question is whether we will follow him, just across the street.
Sometimes the longest journey is just crossing the room. Thanks for deep diving with us. We'll see you next time.